I'm here with Eddy Lindenstein, the host of the Mind and Fitness podcast and one of my favorite podcasters. So, Eddy, I wanted to tell you, the purpose of my podcast, and this will not surprise you because Eddy is very familiar with TMS, mind-body issues. But our podcast is called Crushing Doubt. When we talked about this when I was on, that a lot of times people need help with the doubts they have, the questions, confusion, and fear. That's all doubt to me. That's how I define that. And so we talk about how we can understand these issues. And I'm totally curious to find out, how did you come to thinking about these issues? Were you a pain sufferer yourself? I don't even know that.
Yeah, no, I certainly was. And I think that the blessing and curse of being an athlete is part of what really perpetuated me into getting there. So the sport that I train in is the only barbell sport that is in the Olympic Games, which is why it's called Olympic weightlifting. But you train the snatch and the clean and jerk. And I had been doing that for, 3-4 years, leading up into a shoulder injury that I sustained at the end of 2015. It happened on Halloween. So I was training for a competition and I dislocated my shoulder, my left shoulder. And this was in training. And something was really, really off. And I just knew that something was off. And at the time, because it was towards the end of the year and everybody is, they've paid all of their deductibles. And so the medical offices are as full as they possibly can be. So it was taking longer than I wanted to be able to get in and actually see a specialist. And I was still continuing to train, but it hurt so bad. It was on fire. My whole left arm was on fire and I was getting kind of some nervy issues going into my hand. And I finally got in to see somebody. I got a steroid injection. The assumption was that this was going to work. I felt better for about a week or so, and it continued to hurt. I went and got an MRI done and took that MRI to a few different doctors. And the guess was that I had sustained a pretty rare injury to a ligament within my shoulder. I had just thought I just kept thinking this is the end of my athletic career. Even using Dr. Google, you couldn't find a whole lot on this specific ligament injury. It was a 1 in a gazillion, which should have really tipped me off that there was something up, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Whenever, and that's something I do talk about on this. I think that any theory that requires random assumptions or really weird stuff, we have to think about that. I mean, sure, weird things can happen, but it is a tip-off, if knowing what we know now.
Yeah. So I get I'm 10 weeks between injury and diagnosis. And I had been taking a lot of prescription painkillers throughout this process just to be able to kind of function in my daily life. And I was involved in software sales and that kind of thing. And just to be able to still play with my kids and still enjoy life the way that I wanted to. It was a necessity to take the stuff that they were giving me. And it was interesting. In fact, I would do a lot of video at this time. This is before I got more into the podcasting stuff, but I was doing video, and the idea was that I was going to document my recovery, whatever that was going to end up entailing. And I have a video from the morning of me going to get this diagnosis and meet with this doctor. And I had just said how much pain I was in. And that I said I had stopped taking my painkillers the day prior because I wanted to go in as symptomatic as possible into this doctor appointment. And so I go in and she reveals this really rare injury to me. And I had, she had said this, she was an athlete too, trained in the same sport that I train in. And my assumption when she had said this, because she was saying surgery and she was saying several months of rehab and she was saying all this, and I'm just miserable because the surgery route to have a shoulder injury when all of your sport is done overhead with your arm over the, up in the air, can be a real career killer. And that was my assumption. Then she said, but this isn't something that needs to be operated on immediately. And, it's something where you can still go back and do the things that you want to do. And if you have some pain, then back off. But that you'll probably be fine doing most things, and we can operate on this, 3 months down the road, 4 months down. Because at that particular time of the year that we were meeting, it just wasn't going to be easy for me work-wise and how old my kid was and all this kind of stuff to just take a good, 5 to 10 months or whatever it was going to take to do the necessary rehab for it. But it was interesting.
How old was? Oh, go ahead.
Zoe at the time would have been a year and a half. Pretty young.
Oh, this is another bond we have. Both of our kids are named Zoe.
Oh,
So
I think we figured that out.
yeah, right, exactly. So, and can you take me through what was going on for you emotionally during this time? Some people, like the way you're telling the story, you're so powerful and assertive as a person, just generally. But I wonder how you felt at that moment. Maybe you were like, yeah, I'll take care of this, But some people are like, oh no, my life's over.
Yeah, no, it was definitely more the latter. Oh no, my life is over. And at the time, the company that I was working at, I was close to being the tippy top performer sales wise at that company. So there was a lot that was going into that. 2011, I had just missed number one. 2012, I had just missed number one. 2013, I had just missed number one. 14, so the same thing. 2015, we're getting around to the end of the year at this point, and I'm literally like watching our CRM, watching our scores between me and like 3 or 4 other people that are in this race. And I'm literally, it's like, it's 11:50 p.m. and our fiscal year was going to end at midnight. And I'm watching the sales figures within our system, thinking one of these people are going to like submit a deal or a sign contract at the end of the very end to just pass me. And then midnight hits, and it was like, I'm number one for the first time ever. Right. So a couple of days later, I go and see this doctor, and she had given me that diagnosis, but then had said that you don't have to get this thing, and it's not immediate. You can still do a lot of the things that you love to do, and it's not going to be a huge issue. And the thing that now looking back, I think is really interesting is that she had told me that, and I had said I did this video before I went and saw her and talked about the amount of pain that I was in, that I had been taking opioids and all that kind of stuff for so many weeks. She told me that. I left the doctor appointment, went right to the gym, and did a lot of the things that I had done prior, and I didn't have pain with it. So that should have really tipped me off, but it did not until years later, right? So fast forward, I end up actually getting a second opinion because the injury that she had described still didn't seem like it aligned with what I knew about the body and kind of where this ligament was and where the injury was and the kind of dislocation that I had had. So I went and I saw the head physician for the Seattle Seahawks, Dr. Edward Calfane, and you see him on every game, and he's the first guy out when Bruce Irvin tore his ACL on Sunday Night Football last week. He was the first guy down to help him up and all this kind of stuff. And, so he's like the best of the best, and he's the athlete guy. I go in, I have surgery. He told me afterwards, thank goodness you were operated on, because it was very, very bad. I don't even know what that means. By the time I went in for surgery, I was I probably was 99% pain-free. But I just thought, like, this is the injury I have, and this is what the imaging says. So you should have the surgery. That's what an athlete would do. So I went in and I had it. They said that it was a torn labrum, a torn rotator cuff. I broke the top of my arm, and I had knocked off a pretty substantial piece of cartilage in the glenoid of my shoulder. And so they did a microfracture surgery, which if you ever Google microfracture, it's basically a list of guys like Penny Hardaway who had that surgery done and then they were never the same. And so this was the fear that I had, because I didn't know that surgery was I didn't know they were going to do that when I had left. So I had kept thinking, like, gosh, as good as this surgery is, like, this is a real thing that I'm going to have to deal with years down the road, and not being the kind of athlete that I was. So, I mean, you can probably sense the sort of turmoil that I was feeling, even leaving the surgery, when I had assumed that all my problems were gone. They estimated 10 months of rehab, and then I'd be cleared for all activity. I rehab like a machine, despite having a young child and a career and all this kind of stuff that I also had to do. But I got cleared in 4 months and 29 days. And he said that was one of the fastest rehabs and recoveries he had ever seen. About a week and a half or 2 weeks before that medical clearance came, I started having sciatica, and I never experienced any problems in my lower body. And I just went to, I went to YouTube. I found some stretches that would be applicable for this, and it went away within a couple of days. And then I go, I start getting like really severe knee tendonitis on the same side.
Wow.
And so gosh, like, okay, well, we'll deal with this. I go to the doctor, they give me anti-inflammatories, they give me opioids again. And that goes away. And then the day after the day before my medical clearance was to come, I started getting severe spasming in my mid back, upper back, and into my neck. And that's when things really started getting bad, because I was like at a computer and my hands were going numb. And so, that went on for 10 months. And it was just it was probably a new doctor every week, a couple of physical therapists, a chiropractor, an acupuncturist. And so I was at By the time I found the right doctor for me for this situation, it was 25 medical professionals deep. And I drove from Seattle to Montana to have a neck operation done, which was, that was supposed to be the holy grail. You're going and seeing the best guy in the world at this particular neck procedure. Oh, sorry, your insurance it doesn't cover this. So pay that out of pocket.
The holy grail is not covered.
Right. $6,000 later. And I have my hydrodissection surgery, and it was supposed to solve all the issues. And I remember driving home the day after it was done and feeling worse. Everything is feeling worse than it was when I went in. And I just can't fathom that this is still going on. I don't know what I'm going to do. So we can pause there if you'd like.
No. I'd love to dip in at this part of the story if you don't mind.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for sharing your story, because it really does help people, I know, to hear these other stories. It's one of the reasons people say they like working with me, is I can tell them my story. You remember it in these minute details, just like I did. And that's because, at least I'll speak for myself, I found it to be such a traumatic event, and it certainly sounds like it would have been for you, to have all of this pain and this suffering, not know what's happening. And that feeling of like the whole body falling apart is very familiar to me, because maybe you fix one thing and you start to just feel like, I guess you just age precipitously. I mean, how old were you when this all started?
So Dr. Sarno talks about the years of responsibility, 30 to 60.
Yeah.
And I was 30 plus 4 months when this stuff started getting really bad.
All right. I was 28 and a half or so. I started being hyper responsible early, I guess. but think about that. Like you're a young man. I started to feel like I was like a 95-year-old man. And I think one of the things I was really curious about is what were other people in your life like during this time? My experience was they were very nice about it, but there was like a failure of imagination on a lot of people's parts to really think, what is this like? And I felt like no one was really in it with me. I don't know if you had that experience, and I'm not saying that to in any kind of damning way of the people in my life, but I just think pain is not well understood, especially by people who haven't had it. I'm curious, what was that like for you?
I would say that I agree, and that it was the same thing for me. However, a few weeks ago, actually, I wrote an email to this guy that I used to work with. He was an executive at the company that I was working at the time. He had said to me, because I'd already had the shoulder surgery and the rehab and stuff, and I was coming off that really phenomenal run of 5 or 6 years of performing so well. And the year that I had the surgery, though, my performance was bad in my eyes. I was still like a top 10 in the company. But to me, I went from being the number 1 guy to now being the number 9th guy. And it was very problematic for me to have it be that way and not be at the top all the time. And I had told him that he had pointed out to me, you had a major surgery, you had a major thing happen in your life, and you couldn't do the stuff that you wanted to do. And I told him, yeah, but that's like, it doesn't matter. I was just supposed to be a little speed bump, and I'm not performing the way that I should be. And he had said, it's a distraction, give some credit to what you just went through, and that it's okay if you're not, so it was really this and I did not want to hear that at all. Like I was a no excuses guy. I sort of saw myself as like you see Russell Wilson throw a pick, or like he threw in the Super Bowl a few years ago against Patriots. And he literally just slaps his hands together and says, all right, let's go on to the next play. And there is no second thought about what he just did. That was what I prided myself in, was that attitude. And now I hate that attitude, but it's because I spent so long maybe trying to be that. And I think a lot of times with TMS, once you kind of grasp what's sort of going on in a lot of this kind of thing, you really recognize that the attitude that you probably really need to have in a way is kind of the antithesis of the way that you thought it should have been all along.
Yeah, I love that point for so many reasons, and there's so many aspects of that. But I think when I was reading Sarno for the first time, and I think it is important to say, I had back pain for 8 years, and not a single person in my life knew about Sarno at the time. That was mind-blowing, especially because I know a lot of people. And I was talking about it too. It wasn't like I was keeping quiet. And when I started to read Sarno, one of the most compelling things for me was the description of the personality type that tends to have this. And I do want to say this, people tend to kind of loop it all together under goodism, which is this concept of people who go out of their way to do good things. And that's true, but there can be other kinds. There's perfectionism, there's drive, there's all these different parts of the self. And when I listen to you, I can hear how hard driving you were with yourself, and me too. And here's another thing that we have in common. I never wanted to take any of my past experiences. I call them traumas now, but back then, hell no. I was not going to call them that, because it was part of my view of myself that I'm not a complainer. I'm not one who's going to blame somebody else for anything. I'm going to take full responsibility. I can do it. And that feeling that I can do anything, you sound very similar to me, channeled in totally different places, because I basically never lifted weights. But I wonder if that idea of the personality jumped out at you when you did the reading also.
It did, so in terms of how I got there to the Sarno stuff, because I had come back from having, going and having that neck thing done in Montana and just feeling so defeated on the way back. One of the most mentioned diagnostics or diagnosis to me was thoracic outlet syndrome, which essentially what it is it's a compression. It could be in a variety of areas, but it's a compression of the nerve bundle called the brachial plexus, which is some nerves, arteries, and veins that sort of come through your neck, and they come into your shoulder through your pec, and they kind of serve the function of making your hands work, making your arms work. And so when doctors would tell me that, they would tell me that kind of a diagnosis, and I would remember that in the beginning when I would try to type and my hands would just go numb. I put a lot of stock into what it is that they were saying. And one of the next recommended steps was having a neck surgery where they would remove the muscles along the side of my neck, my scalenes, and then have both of my pec minors removed to try and ease some of the nerve and the arterial issues that they said that I was having. And I had an EMG done, and it suggested that I definitely had interruptions in a lot of these particular nerve pathways. Ironically, the guy from the Seahawks was the one that did the surgery. And there was an article in the local news around this time about the Woodland Park Zoo is our big zoo here. And two chimps had gotten into a fight, and one of them blew up his knee pretty good in this. And so, it's such a stark. Wow. I really miss this kind of news, right? Because now it's just Trump did this and Biden does this.
Yeah,
and
right.
COVID
right.
and all this kind of stuff. So I really
more monkeys.
Yeah.
We need more monkeys blowing out their ACLs.
Yeah. So I really missed the news of the number one headline being that two chimps fought in the local zoo, which was awesome. So, but the story about it was it had said top University of Washington Dr. Kimberly Harmon, who's the Huskies team physician for the Huskies football team, basically cured this monkey. But what caught this chimp, but what caught my eye was that it was a non-surgical. And that was I've done the surgery. I want to talk to the person who's the non-surgical sports doctor. So I call in to UW, Heck Ed, and they had said that she was booked several months out, but I can get on a waiting list. And so I got on a waiting list. I got a call a day later. We had 3 cancellations today. Could you make it in? Fuck yeah, I can make it in. So I get down there an hour, 2 hours later, and I meet her. I have all my imaging with me, and she does a full evaluation. Normally, at least here, I'm assuming where you are too, if you go and see a doctor, particularly an orthopedic or sports doctor, you get 10 minutes, maybe. That's just how the insurance world works. She probably spent 45 or 50 minutes doing a real physical evaluation of how do my shoulders move? How does my neck move? How does my back move? What's the reaction time? What's the tonality and the different musculature that I have? And then what are all my results? And she had said, what is the first question she asked me after doing all this stuff is she kind of leans back in her chair and says, tell me about what your stress levels are like, and tell me about what's going on in your life. And I had said, well, what do you mean what's going on in my life? She goes, what do you do for a living? And I said that I sell software. And she said, do you have kids? And I was like, I got 1 kid, and we've got another one on the way that's going to be here in the beginning of 2018. And have you moved recently? It's so interesting because there's so much that she asked me that would have been perfect in Sarno's first chapter, his first couple of books. But so she just kind of asked all this stuff. And I said, but Dr. Harmon, I have all these images and it says I have all these problems. And she said, I don't care what the tests say. They're not at all consistent. And, the body heals and kind of all this stuff that I know now.
Right.
She sent me on my way with I told you, I kept getting prescriptions for painkillers for years. I wasn't an addict or anything like that. I mean, when I had the shoulder surgery, I was off them in 3 days, off the oxy. And so it's not, I've never even had a cigarette. So it's not like that side. And there's plenty of people that deal with that stuff. But her prescription pad had said sports psychologist and had the name of the guy that she sends the athletes to. And she just had kind of, leaned on the fact that as athletes, they're like, you might have a great receiver that gets 10 catches and 150 yards every single week. And then, we play Cal or we play whatever, or we play USC or something like that. And he has 1 catch, 5 drops and 12 yards. She's like, he needs to go see this sports psychologist for 5 days probably before we could get him into a place to be able to play again. And she just said, I think that's more of what is going on. And I kind of left the office like, oh, fuck, I don't know if she knows what she's talking about, whatever. But it is the first doctor where I left without a prescription for something that was tangible. I sort of shrugged it off. I go on Amazon. I'm looking for like mobility and foam roller stuff and that kind of thing. And it said suggested purchases, healing back pain by Dr. Sarno. And there was 1,800 reviews or something like that and 4.8 out of 5 stars. And so I click on that because it caught my eye as a consumer. And I start reading some of the testimonials, and I bought it. And I was just like blown away. I read it on the back deck it took me 2 days or something like that to read it. But I had just said, like 25 medical professionals, and this is sort of what it all comes down to. And though he didn't say to do this, and other people in the field have said to do this since, but one of the first things I did was that I made a list of all the different medical issues I had for as long as I could think back. And then, so I do that on the left-hand side of a piece of paper. And then on the right-hand side, I did what was going on in life at the time. And I mean, we're talking like allergies, we're talking asthma, we're talking nosebleeds, we're talking like all these things that had gone back for as long as I could remember. So, I mean, I don't know, 12 years old, 14 years old, something like that. It was a perfect correlation to something that I could name. And that was, I mean, I had a good 40 or 50% drop, I'd say, in pain in a couple of days just because of that. But it was enough to say, okay, you've now been out of training for 9 months. I hadn't stopped working out really in any way, any meaningful way, at least to what I would wanted to do. So I would do, I'd go take walks as opposed to doing heavy squats and deadlifts. So not the stuff I wanted to do. But the next day I walked into my old gym and I prepaid for 3 months, and I went back and I haven't stopped since. So, we can take some other steps along in the process, but that end of June, early July, 2017 was really where my corner was turned.
That's unbelievable. I mean, to hear, I always love hearing that moment when the belief changes over. And for me, the pairing of emotion with an event was incredibly important also. I really like your idea of a list of things. There's a couple things I wanted to say about that. One is that kind of thing can help a lot of people. I say this to people all the time. If that kind of thing doesn't help you, don't worry, because there's other ways to do this. Because actually, the way I'm thinking about what happened for you is your belief system changed when it made sense to you finally. So this is what I say to people a lot of the time is, we have to help this make sense to you. So let's say I say this to people who aren't finding that correlation. Now, it could be that they're just not seeing the correlation, or maybe they are pushing that correlation away. But there are people who it doesn't seem correlated like across the board. And I say to them, well, it's really about you feeling no doubt about this, which I think is what happened for you with that emotional stuff. And I'm also fascinated by how in looking back, I could recognize that essentially I had mind-body issues from childhood. It's like what you said. You went down this list and you were like, nosebleeds at age 12. Like, that's something I do encourage people to do is think about all of those different things. So you see how that belief system changed. And then another thing that I want to say stands out about your story to me is you also had a certain measure of confidence in yourself to say, okay, now I've got this. Now that I understand this, I'm putting that money down. What can you talk about that part of yourself? Is that something you've always had, a kind of confidence in who you are and what you can achieve? It sounds like you kind of used your hard driving personality in a positive and very different way all of a sudden there.
At a certain point in my life, yes. I had, in my adolescence, when I was 16, I was very overweight, and it was interesting because my parents are both school teachers. And so we would have summers off, they would have summers off. So usually the summers were like, school gets out June 20th, give or take a few days, and we're going on a road trip and we'll be back in August. Right. So me and my brothers would, depending on the car we had that particular year, we would all cram ourselves into this 2-door 77 Plymouth Volare coupe and be gone for 9 weeks or whatever. And then other times it would be one of those old VW buses from the 60s, and we're all cramming into this bus, and we're going to go to Oklahoma, we're going to go to Pennsylvania, we're going to go to Boston, we're going to go to wherever. So that was a lot of what my childhood was like. But the summer of 2002, we went. My little brother was a pretty successful youth wrestler, like an amateur wrestler. And he went to compete for a national title in the summer of 2002. And so we go on this road trip, and we were gone for 3.5 or 4 weeks, something like that. But I had said that, cause at that time, like I was not working out in the gym. that was just not a part of my life. But I had said that I'm going to try every single town that we stop in. So for 25 or so straight nights, I said, I'm going to try the bacon cheeseburger they have in this town. And so I get back from this trip, or, we're getting to the tail end of this trip, and I'm like, man, everything feels so much tighter on me. Like my clothes feel so much tighter. I feel like I've really, I don't know what happened, but I like see myself in the mirror, and I just feel like, man, I got really fat. And I was overweight before, but then I was really overweight from sitting in a car for 4 weeks and just eating nothing but total crap. And we got home on July 21st. I know these dates. You talk about these small little details. That's like, it's a blessing and a curse, right? So July 21st, we got home, but I had said that, the day after we get home, I'm going to start going to a gym and getting healthy. And that's just how it's going to be. Pretty much up to that point, I was not like the super driven guy. I was just sort of floating around, and which was fine. I was plenty happy, right? Like, we have slumber parties every Saturday. We watch classic pro wrestling. We play video games till 4 a.m. and we'd fall asleep. That was kind of our thing. But I said, when I get back from this trip, I'm going to get in shape because I want to be like in better shape. I want to get a girlfriend. I want to do this and that. I want to go get a job. I want to get all this stuff. So I had spent the next several months working out 6 days a week when I had never worked out before. And I ended up losing 100 pounds in that span of time over a few months. Got my first job, got like my legit first girlfriend. And then years later, I got this tattoo, which is, I had told the tattoo artist, I said, think of the elephant graveyard in The Lion King. And that's the backdrop that I want. But what this is going to represent is the death of the fat guy died on July 22nd, 2002. And so it's a headstone, and it says 7/22/2002. And so that's really where a lot of that stuff started, was the go, push, do all that stuff, which, years later, after I found the Sarno stuff and the therapist that I was working with, who was not a TMS guy, he just happened to be really highly rated, and coincidentally it was 2 miles from my house. He's since retired, but when I had come in and started talking about Sarno, and he actually had heard of him and actually really bought into what he had said, which I found was not actually common in the world of psychology, which I was surprised about.
It really isn't. We'll talk about that in a second. Keep going.
By the end, before we had our last session, and I worked with him for about 9 months before he retired, he had told me, I think that you really need to think about the period of time in your life of being really overweight and being made fun of a lot as a kid, because I certainly was. And he had said, just think about your older self, what you could say to your younger self, put your arm around that guy and just say it's going to be okay. And he's like, really, in any situation that life is really challenging you with, think about that moment, because that's really who you need, is somebody that can put their arm around you and say it's going to be okay, as opposed to the drill sergeant push stuff, which is really parallel with a lot of the people who have kind of talked about the Sarno stuff after. Schubiner sort of speaks in that way. Nicole Sachs very much speaks in that way. So I don't know. It's all interesting stuff, but I would say it all started on that day. But I'm still very proud of this tattoo and that part of my makeup and who I am, even though it may have led me to get into some precarious, because I also wouldn't have achieved a lot that I have achieved without that attitude sometimes.
You know, that had to be in you somewhere. But this is a theme that I talk about all the time. I can't say I talk about it all the time on this podcast because it's only the second episode. But I do talk about it all the time with patients. I talk about it with virtually everybody I can talk to about it. I find that there's a really personal journey to this kind of work, and this is really interesting to me. How my ideas have changed about therapy, understanding this, and something you were saying before, really jived with that, which is, so I was seeing a therapist at the time that I discovered Sarno too, and I brought it to him as I was getting better. And I said to him, could you read this book? And not only would he not listen to me or accept it, he wouldn't even read the book. He wouldn't even give it a chance. And that was disturbing and upsetting to me. There's an interesting story behind that. Well, interesting to me anyway. Did you see the movie All the Rage? The Michael Galinsky film?
Yep, sure did.
Okay, so I was talking to Michael Galinsky at the time because I was really interested in the film and wanted to be involved in some way. And he said to me, this was probably a year or two after I had discovered Sarno, and he said, how can you work with a therapist who doesn't believe in the core concept of your life? And we have people in our lives who say these things that can really help us break through to something. And I think the fact that my own therapist was not open to this thing that clearly had helped me, and I even asked him, I was like, well, what do you think happened? How did I get better? And he was like, I just think you healed. And I was like, you think that I've been seeing you for 7 years and I magically healed? It's just like the amount of blindness was shocking. And I think it's really sad, and it's changed my way of thinking about therapy, that the body is such an important part of how we should think about this. It's talking to us. And I think, that 16-year-old kid you were, it wasn't just a bunch of cheeseburgers talking to you. It was your experience of your body and how you related to other people and how they were relating to you. And I love that you then transformed it into something that's actually on your body. It's like it's with you all the time. And so you have had a lot of people on your podcast, and I wonder how many of them do you find do talk about these kind of personal power stories? I'm really interested in that.
I mean, to be honest, it's a good chunk. The people that come on and if I have 4 episodes that air in a month, usually like one of them is a solo, one of them is an expert, 2 of them are recovery stories. Like that's a pretty typical month. I don't know, 75% of the time, the recovery stories very much come through as somebody who took their power back, where they were kind of this, maybe like a shell of themselves. I mean, that's very much how I saw myself. When I look back and I think of all the doctor's offices I walked into and just sort of was this lost, feeble, this guy that 2 years earlier was hitting clean and jerks at 250 pounds, weighing 150 pounds in competition with relative ease, and being the bravado top sales guy, not Wolf of Wall Street in attitude, but in the way that I saw myself as a salesperson, but I was a lot nicer than him.
Right. Glad to hear it.
There was no cocaine and strippers and all that stuff in the office, but that was just sort of how and then I was just thinking like, God, it's only been, how far have you fallen? It has been, you're only 14 months removed from that. And now you're in this guy's office who's literally telling you that you can't even turn your head certain ways or you're going to lose feeling in your hands. When I first sort of found out about the dirty little secret of TMS and reading the books about it, the initial response was, I want to walk back into the office of everybody who told me that I had this other serious problem and the guy who did my surgery and all this kind of stuff, and punch those people square in the mouth because they lied to me. But then as time went on, it was like, they were trained in this really specific thing. And to be trained, like my mom's a biologist, right? So for me to tell her that this stuff is all real and she should change the way that she thinks about medicine and biology and all that kind of stuff, and maybe think about the things that are in Sarno's books, like I can't really blame her all that much if she's going to tell me that, well, my pain's real.
I'm always interested when there's these conundrums of, why. So you're saying I walked into doctors, I was doing clean and jerk lifting, and I was super strong, and 2 years later I'm a shell. Things that don't make sense like that, and I understand the doctors are trying to make as much sense of it as they can, and just in the way you said, they're trained in this, they're trying to make it fit, but the things they end up saying now sound so crazy to me. And look, I should say, I always say this, doctors are really important. They're great for all kinds of things, including especially life and death stuff. You got to go to doctors if you're ever worried about it. But if you have been to a bunch of doctors and you just got a bunch of weird diagnoses, then you do want to start thinking about how's this adding up. Anytime we get into situations where something isn't making sense, as a medical consumer, for lack of a better way of putting it, we're kind of taught that we don't know anything, but we're also supposed to figure it out somehow. Mm-hmm. That weird dichotomy was so shocking to me, and I really had no problems before then, physically speaking. I mean, I had minor TMS stuff, but this is why I think the personal power thing is so important, because that was when I started getting better, I started realizing, I was viewing it as if I have no power, I have no way to know things. And the way we have these areas of expertise everywhere we go, that just feeds it. And so I do think we do have to connect to our own power, but I also think that it would be really great if practitioners could look at, well, what's going on? How does this make sense? How can this guy who was so strong before suddenly be crumbling? And kind of ask themselves that question.
Well, and that's sort of where, and now that, literally as of yesterday, the Pac-12 announced they're going to do a football restart, and that's going to happen November 7th. But Dr. Harmon has said that she'll jump on the podcast, and we can do an interview together. She was, not only did she spend all this extra time with me, she was also the only doctor that had asked me, the questions like, what do you do for a living? The questions like, what do you enjoy doing? What did you do for fun before all this stuff started? So right. Even though she didn't say that loud, now that you're saying it, I don't think it's too far-fetched for her to believe that, look, you did all these things that you were super good at, and now it's not working out. And athletes don't just lose it overnight. And there's been plenty of athletes through the years in different sports that suddenly they just lost it. It seemed like the biggest example that I can think of is like Rick Ankiel played for the Cardinals as a pitcher. And then suddenly, like, the dude kills it in college, kills it in the minors, kills it when he first gets to MLB, and then suddenly he just loses his arm. That doesn't make sense to me. And then they move him to the outfield, and he can hit 500-foot home runs like it's nothing, and I can put him on all my fantasy teams and draft him on my video game versions. But the dude just couldn't throw a ball anymore. It doesn't even make sense. So there's that. There's Andrew Luck in football. There's Tiger Woods in golf. Like, I can see all these now, but when you're blind and you can't see any of it.
Yeah. I'm curious what you thought about, this is my personal theory, but I watched Usain Bolt dominate his sport. And the first time he lost, the next race he pulled his hamstring. And I don't know what happened exactly, but I just think we expect these athletes to be superheroes. And when they're hurting and it's on display, that's got to be pretty hard. Mm-hmm. And you do see it all the time. And I love the way you're framing it, because I like to think of it as, how does it make sense? And I think that's what Dr. Harmon was saying. Like, let's talk about this. And that's another thing that's going on in society, is we're not taking enough time to talk to each other and say, how does this make sense? The great thing is, if you dive into the science at all, it all is on our side. The New England Journal of Medicine, all of these studies show, I actually say this sometimes, I'm like, if you want to Google, do herniated discs cause back pain, you'll find two types of articles. You'll find scientific research that says they don't, that there's no correlation whatsoever, or you'll find doctors that say they do. And I don't even necessarily blame the doctors. That's what they're being trained in. But if that's your profession, you've got to look at it and say, does this make sense? And I think this would be a real sea change for people, and it has been. So now I want to talk a little bit about what led you to start your podcast, because I imagine it came from some kind of passion about this, but I want to hear what got it going.
It's odd to say now, but when I had found the Sarno stuff, I had been at the company I was working at for about 6 years. Very high income, well into the six figures. And I came home one day and told my wife, I went out drinking with a buddy of mine, and I was just telling him like all the frustrations in life. And I feel, I've just discovered this thing, and it's sort of like, it's almost like I'm not religious in any way, but it almost was like a rebirth. And me just thinking like, I feel like I have to be doing something else, and I don't know what it is, but I have to be doing something else. And he's like, why don't you just quit your job and go do something else then? And he said it just very matter of factly, and kind of gave me like a pump up Tony Robbins session, which in that moment I really shouldn't have made such a rash decision. But in the end, it's, I look back 3 years later and it's like, no, that was the right thing to do. But I went in, told my wife, I got to quit my job. I got to quit it tomorrow. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And she's like, you're really sure about this? And I had said, yeah, I'm really sure about it. And she had just said, I support you. And it was that simple. And, to have a couple $100,000 of income now, just leave with no replacement and no other job, kudos to her. And I love her to death. But just being able to sort of give me the leeway, and even if she felt shitty about it, to not even express that and just sort of let me go do my thing.
That's great.
Yeah, it was awesome. So walked in, quit my job. CEO was blown away. Couldn't, believe it. He wanted to meet with me and, find out what is it that I plan on doing. And I had said that I was going to become like an online fitness trainer. So I bought my, all my audio equipment, and I started the Eddy Knows Fitness podcast. And the first like 2 episodes were interviewing athletes, and we were talking a lot about, sets times reps and strength programs and all this kind of stuff. And I just got through a couple of those, and I was just like, this kind of sucks. Like, this is not what I want to be talking about. Just not a lot of substance to it. And then I had an old buddy of mine from high school who was an ex-Marine. He's a real estate agent now in the area, but I had him on the show, and I'm interviewing him, and I just start asking him about, I didn't know how we got into it. Maybe it's because we were drinking when we did the interview, but I go back and I listen to it. It wasn't one of my best ones, but the moment that came out of it that really sort of turned the tide for the whole podcast was when he started talking about headaches that he has had since he got back from being deployed. And I had asked him, like, when are they happening? What, he started talking about insomnia. And then he was saying that these headaches happen a lot when he thinks about all of the friends that he lost in battle. And then he starts weeping. And I was just like, what a moment. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I would much rather talk about. Men and their feelings, right? Which is like, it's the only kind out there. And now, at this point, there's several podcasts on the topic, but I couldn't find anything that was related to TMS when I first started it. My hope is that I get really cool emails from people probably, twice a week, sometimes from countries I couldn't have told you where Burkina Faso was before my podcast. But people just saying that, like this woman in San Diego, she's a ARNP, registered nurse practitioner. She had just said that she had a picture of her and her youngest daughter, and had said that she had finished up her school and started a residency right when this kid was born. And that, she's been with her the whole time, right? Like, is this baby, the only life that she knows is her mom is a doctor. And I had just, I commented on the picture, and I had just said, I hope that you're really proud of you, because I know that she's really proud of you, and she's going to be forever. And the response that she gave back was that she owes a big portion of this to the podcast that I do. And I was just thinking wow, how cool that kind of stuff is, but it's stuff that I hear a lot. And I think I would say once every other month, I feel very stifled creatively. Like, gosh, this podcast even still have wheels, and what the hell am I going to talk about next week and all this kind of stuff. But then inevitably I walk into the garage and I hit record with no plan of what I'm going to say. And I pump out a 40-minute episode that I think was trash, and it airs. And I get 10 emails the next day from people saying how big of an impact that made in their lives. And I'm like, I don't know. Some of the ones I think are great, I end up getting no response for. Some of the ones I think are terrible, I get all the response for. So I don't know.
Right. It's weird. And for me, I don't know. We'll have to see. But, you know, I was thinking, you said this thing about a kind of spiritual shift, and I could really identify with that too. I've gone through different periods in my life. I've never been particularly religious at all, or even all that spiritual. In fact, at a certain point, I got very kind of atheistic. I got very into, like, I was watching Bill Maher all the time, and he's talking about atheism all the time, and I was totally in that direction. And then when this happened, it felt like the closest thing that I could say to something spiritual. I was like, because it felt like I had a purpose all of a sudden. And I think that sounds similar to what you were saying, that you tried to do the podcast first, and it was really just about working out, and it was not fulfilling to you anymore, that kind of thing, or if it ever was. And it became, because I was going to ask you, how did this change your life? But I'm hearing it, you know, in spades, and you were able to connect to your central powers and interests and emotions. And so you mentioned, you know, men in mental health, and how back then you didn't have a lot of that. Now there's a lot more of it, but I still think it's always a particular pleasure. It certainly has been for me to connect to another man and be able to talk about the emotions, because it's not the way we grew up. You know, we grew up with the Boys Don't Cry. I love the Cure song, Boys Don't Cry, but I don't like the experience at all. And, you know, so when I came on to talk to you on your podcast, we talked about men in mental health. I think you were saying that I was the first male psychologist to come on, other than Eric Sherman.
Yep, at the time, yeah, that was true.
Yeah. And we also talked about, you know, the idea of fatherhood. And so I wanted to hear a little bit from you about how you're seeing. Are you seeing a change in the openness that men have? Or are you seeing just a difference in that way?
I know there's going to be opportunities upcoming where all these guys will be able to get together and sort of, I feel weird proposing it, but, you know, to say, hey guys, like, when we feel okay sitting around and having a beer together, whatever, and just talking about life and feeling okay with that. Like, I don't know how to ask them other than, hey guys, listen to this podcast I did. And I'll talk about
right.
my proposal.
We'll talk about it on the side, and then we'll act like that.
But I remember reading this book. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was right after I'd read Sarno. It's not a psychology book or anything like that. But the author had talked about the necessity of finding people in your life that have earned the right, which is a phrase I use a lot in sales, but earned the right to hear your 100% vulnerable self. Who are the very select number of people in the world that can be given the gift of you telling them everything about you without feeling like you're going to be judged, which sounds sort of arrogant on the surface, but it's really not. And I remember there's a buddy of mine, Pete, and I had told him that I had read this thing in a book, and I was trying to scrounge and think about who in my life fits this criteria. And it's you, man. And in a sitcom or a movie or a show or whatever, that's me coming on to him and saying that I want you to be my lover forever, right? Like, that's how that turns into. But it's right. A guy with no sleeves with tattoos telling another guy,
yeah,
dude, like, I feel like I can express how I feel and emotionally, you know, like, I feel like we really connect, and just having that be okay. And like, he told me that he felt exactly the same way. And I just thought, like, God, I really wish that the world functioned more in this way. But I have found myself, especially since that moment, that when I do feel that way about another person, saying it to make sure that they know it. And sometimes, you know, that maybe it's distancing to the friendship or whatever. But first of all, I'm only saying this to the very select number of you that fit that criteria, which is very few people. I'd say that's one of my bigger takeaways from all of this kind of work, is just the ability to get vulnerable and feel okay with being vulnerable. And if it goes, it goes. If it tears, it tears. But very Brene Brown-esque is kind of how I see it.
I think that's so wonderful. It's so refreshing. And, you know, it's how I felt when I went on your podcast. And it is the way I live too. I feel, and really my body has taught me to do it more than anything. I'm less afraid of opening up to people because whatever's there is there anyway. So let's find out. But I think that to leave us all on one last point that I think you made so beautifully, which is, it's not arrogant to say, I've got to be careful with me about who I share my core self with, who really deserves this. Every single person, if you think about it, and if they get to know themselves well, is gold. That's a phrase that I often use. I am gold. And not just about me, about you. Anybody can be that way as long as they're really connecting with themselves. And then they can share their actual self. So, Eddy, I really want to thank you for coming on. I wanted you to be one of the very early guests because you were very pivotal for me in believing in myself, to believe that I could do this. You know, it partly came from, there were a number of experiences, but going on your podcast and feeling like there was a really positive response to me made me feel like, you know what, I can do this more. So this is what we do for each other in society, is if we can inspire hope and belief in the self. And so you have done that for me, and I thank you for coming on. And everybody tune into the Mind and Fitness podcast. It's a great podcast. I get, rave reviews about it. People come to me through those interviews all the time. And Eddy is just a great guy, and we can connect, and I love that. So thank you for coming on, Eddy.
Yeah, it's an honor. Thanks, Dan.
What a journey Eddy's been on, huh? He's so inspiring. I mean, here you have this go-getter, this young guy at the top of his game, mentally, physically, professionally, and he literally watched his body fail. I mean, if anyone's ever had that experience of that, it's crushing, right? And I don't know, Dan, what struck me the most in this whole discussion is like, it's that moment that he paused. Remember when he talks about going to that doctor, having her tell him that it was psychological, that it might be something he might want to go to a sports therapist or a sports psychologist for. And he just kind of blew that off, right? Like, really? Like, look at all my stuff. Look at all.
That was one of the great things about listening to the interview, is it's a reminder of the fact that all of the people like me who got better, we had moments along the way, generally, where we had doubt, or where we were like, wanted to push it away, that was what was happening. So yeah,
I mean, it's very typical.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was, but what I think was most interesting is that he took a pause where he said to himself,
see, but that's
how
not
could
typical,
that be?
Right?
Well, exactly. But he got curious. And to me, you can't get curious if you're just constantly looking to the next thing, when your mind is just going. But in out of his journey, out of all of this, right, he was able to say to himself, wait, that's something different. No one out of the 25 doctors that I've seen has said that, and that's interesting.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I found with Eddy when I went on his podcast, and now that he's come on ours, I did feel like he's a little different than your average person, in that he's an incredibly curious guy anyway. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he paused and said, what's going on? Now, usually it's the pain that pauses people. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that gets them to be like, what is going on? It felt to me like he got to it sooner.
Do you think that though,
ways.
or do you think that they do, or do you think that they actually just want the pain to go away? Because I think there's kind of two things that go on, right? There's either the
I see.
That's interesting. How I wonder
what
that is, or
that's what I was
stop.
saying.
I got to get on the court tomorrow. I got to get on the green. Whatever the thing is that you do, it needs to go.
No,
away.
this is another great moment where we thought we were talking about the same thing, but we weren't, because what I was talking about is exactly what you're saying. They usually get woken up by, or not woken up by even. They pain gets their attention because it is something you cannot get away from, and they just want it to go away. You're talking about something different, which I agree. It is different, and usually that comes, well, not usually, but a lot of times it comes after people have come to see me. They come to me and they're just like, can you please just make the pain go away? The pause and the curiosity comes a little bit later. Sometimes it's early in the first session with me, or sometimes in reading a book, but the pause is a key moment because it shows the person is starting to engage with themselves, which is such an important part of getting better, no matter who you are or what your journey is. Because I find these things, they run very different courses based on very different people. I have rules of thumb.
I mean, don't you think there's a lot of people that the fear, like you said, it really depends on the person, because extremely sensitive person, right, might have a totally different experience than someone like Eddy, who's, he's a tough guy. I mean, he's at least, he appears to have that kind of, there isn't this, fear of just being sensitive. Like, he's like, I'm a tough guy, and this is more than I can handle. Right. And then
he knew
fear
it.
starts to play.
But he also paused. If you notice this in the interview, he paused after all the cheeseburgers. he said, I mean, that's such an amazing story. And he tells it with it's self-deprecating in that lovable way, but it also was just so honest. And it's one of the things that I find so refreshing about him, but also, I know we talked about this, that like when two men connect in that way, there's something that I find really special about it, because, we grow up in a culture where there's this toxic masculinity and where we're kind of taught, don't be revealing, don't be vulnerable with the other guy.
I think that narrative,
telling this story.
Yeah. And I think that narrative about men, thanks to a lot of incredible mothers out there of young boys, are starting to have these conversations about, it doesn't need to be this taboo thing.
I'm finding it's not as much taboo in our generation, and I'm proud of our generation. People talk about the generations. Gen X gets kind of dumped on a lot, and I think our generation is awesome in a lot of ways. And one of them is this. The men and the women of this generation understand that we've gotten pushed into a position where it's taboo, and all we have to do to break it is to relabel how we're thinking about it. I would say this to patients when I was starting out as a therapist training, that no, it takes great strength to show these things. But the truth is, I was just saying it. I didn't believe it for me entirely. I believed it was true intellectually, but emotionally we still feel it. So it's taboo inside. We have to get at the heart of that. And one thing I do with myself, and Eddy, I think, did a very similar thing, is we take the bull by the horns and we tell ourselves, no, I'm going to be a badass and talk about this. It's a really different way of, yeah.
Do you think that self-disclosure, like if you're talking to, I know as a woman, right, you reveal something personal, and, in women's friendships, we tend to come right back and say, oh yeah, oh my gosh, I had a similar experience. Or do you, in your world, in your friend circles, have that experience where if you were to say something that you were experiencing that was quite personal, wouldn't it be probably more of a very close friend? Or would you feel like, obviously you're not going to go tell a stranger this, but someone that's not your best buddy? In a general sense.
I go to CVS and I just talk about how vulnerable I am. No, it's interesting. This has become kind of a litmus test for me about what type of guys I want to be close to. So I actually actively put something out there, because I'm like, if you can't handle this, we're done here. That may sound harsh, but I don't mean we're done here like I'm not going to talk to them anymore, but I'm not going to I'm not going to continue to be vulnerable with a person like that when I know there are people out there like Eddy, or so my closest male. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say he had a really good friend that kind of helped him, get to that point, like his Tony Robbins moment, right? Where
there was that, but there was also the guy he trusted with his vulnerability. And he didn't know if it was going to be okay. And when it turned out to be okay, that really changed their relationship.
Right. I think it makes it stronger and deeper. And I think that as we get older, it seems sometimes more difficult to find people that we can feel that connection with and that we can grow into a safe space with. So that we can talk about these things.
They made the movie I Love You Man about this. It's funny because one of my closest friends, Lorne, from New York, he was in Brooklyn when I was living there, and he and I kind of developed a system with each other over time that was basically about holding ourselves to the standard of being sincere, and not just with each other, but just in general. And I think he would agree with this, but I was a little further in that journey than he was. And so I used my being further in that journey to invite him to come further. And he has said it changed things for him. But then he started giving back to me in ways that I had never experienced before. You know, my one of my closest friends from high school, Jeff, I'm shouting out names to you guys. He's also like that. I just talked to him today. He's in California. The fires are getting very, very close to his house, and it turns out it's okay. But we could talk about the real things, and that's really what I think we need to aspire to. We need to challenge ourselves as a society to break down the taboo of emotion. We're always talking about the taboo of the intellect. What I mean by that is we don't want people to say that that's not okay, even though some people still do, which is weird to me. But we need to feel it inside, and to do that, we need to walk the walk. Okay, I'm going to shift gears now. It's time for some Q&A.
If you have any questions you'd like us to answer here on Crushing Doubt, feel free to send us a note at Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and make sure to put @CrushingDoubt in your message so we can make sure that we receive it, and we may possibly answer your question on the air.
Love it. I can't wait to hear from the audience. I get such fascinating questions, and it's really a fun part of my job to answer these questions, because these are people who are really dying to know the answers, and they've asked these questions, but they keep not getting answers. One of the ways that I find that I'm different than even other mind-body practitioners is that a major focus of my work is resolving doubt. No surprise, given that we're called Crushing Doubt. But as a result, I work with a short-term model that's designed to just get at these questions. And the role of doubt versus emotion is very important, because a lot of mind-body people go over and over the emotions. So one of the questions that I get from people all the time is, well, why am I not getting better? What am I doing wrong, is what they end up saying. And I always feel bad for the people who are saying that, because they're getting the impression that they're doing something wrong. If you're not getting better, that's not your fault. That's the fault of the information that you're getting. One thing that I often say to people is the theories need to make sense. So when they were discovering the orbits of the planets around the sun, after they had figured out that the sun was not revolving around us, they noticed certain things, and they were kind of calculating where the stars should be and where the planets should be, but it was only making like 80% sense. And it was Kepler who came in and said, no, they're ellipses. It's not circular orbits. And when they tried that out, guess how much time it was right? 100% of the time. Good theories can get it right 100% of the time, and that's kind of what I think about. So when people ask me, why am I not getting better? You're not getting the information that you need. And in specific, that's because we're too reliant on how emotions cause physical issues, which, by the way, I'm not saying that's not true at all. That's a huge part of what I do also. And it's great work that a lot of mind-body practitioners are doing. But if you're not factoring in the doubt that you can have, and by the way, when I say that, I'm referring to all different types of doubt. There's fear is like the emotional version of doubt. Confusion is the intellectual version of doubt, where it's just like, I don't get what's happening. I don't know. Unresolved questions is a form of doubt. And even just the struggle to be certain about things, which in our society has become, I think, more and more prevalent, mostly for bad. There are ways in which it's good, but you need to know about the doubt as it's playing a role in the symptoms. One other area that I talk about is I say this term, and I know it's confusing, but it's not when you start to think about it. It's power. You can use different words for that. There's somebody I work with who she struggled with the idea of power because it made her, she didn't want to be powerful, but when she reframed it as strength. And I was like, great, run with that word. It doesn't matter what word you're using. It's are you living the life you want to live? And so when I hear that question, why am I not getting better? I feel like there's 2/3 of the puzzle missing. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is, 1/3 of the puzzle is not getting it done. And there's so much more to it also, including getting all these questions answered. Here's another one. How can I know when I get better from this work that it was this work that did it? That's a great question.
Does it matter?
That's also a great question. I love that, Julie. To some people it doesn't matter, but I will say the people that I work with, it will matter to them, because if you can get better and it doesn't matter to you, why? More power to you. But for the people who really need those answers,
most people I think want to know, but
most people do, and in a lot of ways, like the smarter you are, the more questions you are going to ask, and the more things you're going to want to know. So I have a couple of rules of thumb about it that help you to know whether this was what changed it. So first of all, if talking changes your physical experience at all, it's a mind-body issue, because talking can't heal broken bones. It can't cure cancer. These are the things we go to doctors for. If the timing is exact when you start to have these thoughts, or you're having these conversations and you start to get better from that's a surefire sign that it is a mind-body issue. If words are essentially allowing you to heal, that's not an accident. So
how about this, Dan? I have one question along that line. What about the phrase "to talk it up is to work it up"?
How does that? I haven't even heard that phrase. To say it again.
To talk it up is to work it up. I believe it's an AA thing, but I'm not for sure.
Okay, great. So I have a supervisee, a longtime supervisee, and she loves that. One of the first things I ever said to her is that the answer is usually it depends, which sounds not helpful overall. But the thing is, AA is different. I think that AA is a particular modality that is extremely helpful. I've been actually very impressed with AA, and I find that actually my friend Lauren tells me that I seem to understand AA, even though I've never been an alcoholic. So I have traits in common with them, I suppose. But there's a certain segment of the population that doesn't do well from talking about it. That to talk about it brings it up to the surface, makes it more of an issue.
For example, you've got knee pain, okay?
Yeah.
And you keep talking about the knee pain. Like it's just all you can talk about because you're in pain, right? So you're talking to everybody you run into, and it's just throbbing and throbbing. And the more and more you talk about it, the more intense it
that's
gets,
exactly what I was talking about. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
We keep having this where we're talking about the same thing, I swear. Go ahead.
But my question to that is, right, can't we also talk it up the wrong way, right? We can talk it out or we can talk it up. So
no, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a segment of the population that I call this attentional TMS. That's remember I call that like a mind body thing. When I meet with people, I'm trying to get a conceptualization of how their mind body issues are functioning, and I do this. It's different with everybody. So I work with some people where they've figured out what their emotional connection is. They don't have doubts, but they can't stop thinking about it. That's the kind you're talking about, where actually, you're talking about something different. You're talking about whether you're that kind of person or not. Does it exacerbate symptoms to talk about it? Mm-hmm. Yes and no. I mean, it also could exacerbate symptoms if you're told you can't talk about it. It really depends on the person. But I think that there are definitely people that if you, like, I can make parts of my body hurt if I just think about them too much. If I just start thinking about
you could start talking about a problem, right? Like a situation you're having with a spouse or, someone in your life. And then every time you talk to someone else, you keep talking about this same problem, and the anxiety and stress
you talk yourself
begins
into
to
a
build
bigger position of it. Yes,
absolutely, until the point that you blow up, right? Where you've been adding, gas to the fire, essentially.
Yeah, well, there used to be groups, mind-body groups, that probably still are, where the rule of thumb is do not talk about pain. It's like Fight Club. The first rule of Pain Club is do not talk about pain. I understood that, but if you apply a strategy across the board, it never works. It's just like with journaling. People are talking about how journaling is an extremely helpful thing, and I don't doubt that it is for a lot of people, but it is especially helpful for people who have trouble accessing their emotions and who can then figure out what's going on for them. For the people who are already way into their emotions and they sit down to journal, they're doing what you're saying. It just whips them into a frenzy. So we have to think about how to apply each thing at each time. And this is another reason I'm doing the podcast. There's just too much to talk about. I could talk about this on and on and on, but we're going to have to wrap up for today. So we're coming back at, yes, to be continued. Every week, Crushing Doubt will bring you new guests and important insights and tips on mind-body experience. We want you to be a part of our effort to change the national dialogue on pain and other symptoms. So please click subscribe, hit like, and ring the bell for notifications on YouTube. Sign up for our newsletter on crushingdoubt.org for updates on my upcoming book's release date, information on new episodes, and the chance to sign up for my live seminars this fall on all the strategies for breakthroughs with pain and other symptoms.
For more information, visit our social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Crushing Doubt, or visit our website, www.crushingdoubt.org. The more support we get, the more influence we can have on changing the national discussion on pain and symptoms to a more accurate and helpful one. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation to our podcast, which requires expenses for equipment, editing, and expanding our reach. You can support us by making a donation at Crushing Doubt on Venmo.
Thank you to our growing podcast audience. I know there are so many out there suffering, sometimes in silence, and I'm hoping to reach and help each and every one of you to resolve your doubts, find relief, and perhaps most importantly, find powerful, peaceful, and happy living.